Lovely guitar you've got behind you. What, is that a Fender Strat?
Oh, it's a Squire Strat. It's it's
Um,
yeah.
anyway, I've got your album Liberty is out on the 11th, if I'm not mistaken. It's released through Renaissance Records. I will put a purchasing link for that below this video.
Right.
My first question is probably a fairly obvious one, really, is what prompted you to make this album and why now?
Well, circumstances really. Normally, being Strawbs on the road, busy recording themselves, I used to find time to sort of record stuff for Strawbs or write stuff, towards Strawbs albums and things. But really, it was as a result of COVID and the lockdowns.
Okay.
That we had a whole load of gigs in line for this year or that year, should I say?
Yeah.
How time flies. But and everything, as like it was for everyone, was just nothing happening. So
Yeah.
stuck at home, a studio that had been accumulating bits of gear and whatever for
Yeah.
too long. So I had a big clear out and redecorated a bit, rejigged it all,
Right.
updated a few things, and just started writing because it seemed the best use of the time.
Sure.
And I came up with the first song I came up with was the title track Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Strawbs Settlement album went into kind of pre-production, which I was heavily involved with.
Yeah.
Which was the last album Strawbs did, again done during lockdown and remotely with everyone. So that took over the next few months really. Although at the same time I was continually writing on bits,
Mm-hmm.
and come I think about August or September of that year, I thought, I'm going to put that track up on Facebook. Not that I was a big Facebook user, but I put it up there, and it kind of was very popular. Got thousands of hits quite quickly, and as it happened, John W. Edwards, the boss of Renaissance Records in the States, got in touch and said, "I love this. Have you got any more?"
Yeah.
So, and so I had written another one, and ended up giving him 4 tracks. And the original idea was to put an EP together.
Okay.
But when we got to that stage and he had got the artwork together, he said, "I really wish it was an LP project." So we're now kind of this time last year, really, and I said, well, working on my own at home, it takes quite a while to assemble the tracks. It's not, obviously it's a lot quicker if you've got a bunch of guys, you sit around, you rehearse, and you can put the stuff down, you work your parts out. So anyway, I carried on and added, another 5 tracks to it, and all of a sudden we had an LP length, So
it's kind of like a lockdown albums, because I mean, there's so many lockdown albums coming out now. I mean, I think the last McCartney album was a lockdown album as well. There's so many artists making great use of this time, I suppose.
Well, absolutely, and it was 100% recorded during lockdown. Hence, it's virtually all me on it. Obviously couldn't have people around to sort of record parts anyway. So I kind of did everything really, and
is that where the title comes from? You call the album Liberty. I was wondering if it was inspired by this feeling of being locked down, or
entirely. Yeah, entirely. That, I mean, I think it's an album in a way that kind of explored feelings and emotions that are brought up during being locked down, and the desire for being freedom again, in a sense, being able to go to the pub at the end of the road or whatever, So I think lyrically and musically definitely reflected that.
Is that a theme, do you think, that's explored on the whole album, or just specifically that track?
Well, no, on the whole album, really. I think. I mean, in a sense that it's, I think a lot of us did a lot of personal soul searching. Well, I did anyway. During all that, gave you time to think. There were no planes in the sky. I lived near Heathrow Airport. You used to hearing planes and seeing, and all of a sudden the world felt like a deathly stillness had fallen across it, you know, and I think some of the lyrics, certainly in Liberty, reflect that kind of the strange, almost surreal feeling that I felt anyway, and I think most of us did. But as it progressed, obviously we went through various lockdowns, but it was pretty much done while we were in each one, if you know what I mean. So hence no one else on it apart from that Liberty track. When I first did it, I sent to a friend of mine, a drummer, and he put drums on that particular track. And one of the other tracks, called A Splash of Blue, had previously appeared on a Dave Lambert and Chaz Cronk, Dave Lambert from Strawbs as well. You know, we had a kind of a Lambert Cronk album about 10 years ago or so, and had appeared on that. But I thought it lyrically and in every way it kind of fitted with the theme, you know, the kind of loose theme of the album. And then the last person that contributed to it was Dave Bainbridge from the Strawbs, who great fab keyboard player, but he's also an amazing guitarist as well. And
he plays
last September.
He plays beautifully on the Life Signs album, I think.
Oh,
is it
gosh,
Dave Bainbridge? Does Dave Bainbridge play guitar on Splash of Blue? Because there's a wonderful solo on that, isn't there?
No, Splash of Blues is Dave Lambert.
Okay.
But there's a track called Slipping Downstream, and Dave Bainbridge puts a fab solo on the end of that. Yeah. Really. And that was the only other outside person that kind of came into the studio to do it, and that was done in September, just gone last year. And Strawbs were getting together to do a couple of festivals, sort of thing. And Dave was staying with us while we did it, and he was listening to what I'd done, and he said, "I'd love to put solo on the end of that." And he picked that guitar. He didn't have a guitar with him because he had keyboards, so he just picked a Fender Strat up there and whacked an amazing solo on the ends. Yeah.
I suppose I'm interested. You talked about all these songs being thematically connected.
Yes.
Would you say that this album then is sailing perilously close to concept album territory?
Oh no, I don't. No, it wasn't really intended as a concept album. Just exploring sort of a loose collection of feelings and thoughts, you know. And I guess at the end of the day, you know, there seemed to be so much negativity about at some point. I mean, for a lot of us, I think it's kind of difficult to turn the news on. You just kind of wanted to head down and get on with being locked down. And you know, at whatever point, it turned into some of the songs were just saying, you know, just trying to reach out to the human spirit and saying, let's have a bit of positive, you know, with a bit of kind of let's stay strong through this all and everything. And
absolutely. I mean, it was just
a reflection on life's trials and tribulations, I suppose.
Yes, and of course, it's quite saddening when I think Strawbs have cancelled the Cambridge. They've been to Cambridge Rock Festival. Was it Cambridge Rock Festival?
Yeah.
Some of the gigs have had.
It was, yeah. But that's well, the first one got cancelled because of the lockdown, COVID, and then of course Dave's health. Dave's cousin's a singer. You know, has had a few health issues over the last, you know, 2 or 3 years, and ultimately now he's had to decide that for the foreseeable future, he can't consider playing live. You know, so but as of Christmas, just before Christmas, he announced that, I think. So although there may be recordings to come, you know, no live shows. Everything had to be cancelled, unfortunately.
So the Strawbs as a touring or playing live, we've drawn a line under that now, and the Strawbs would just be like a studio recording band from now on.
Well, he says for the foreseeable future. I mean, I guess it depends how his health goes. So, in a way, I mean, I've been written this year off. If you know, if he feels up to it, whenever, we can always talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I hope he gets well soon, because I've always loved seeing the Strawbs play, and Dave Cousins is just, you know, excellent. Back to the album, actually, there's a track on there called Everybody Knows. Now, I could be wrong, but is this a re-recording of an old Strawbs number that you've revisited, or is that correct?
In a way, I wrote it about 10 years ago. I think it came out on the Broken Hearted Bride album or something.
Okay.
So so I'd written the song, and at whatever point Dave and Chris Tangreed, the producer, heard it, and I said, "Oh, we'd love that to go, for Strawbs." So it was totally re-recorded for Strawbs at the time, but I obviously had the original track, which I never quite completed. So what I did was just complete it as an all solo work sort of thing.
Right. Was it strange revisiting a track after all this time? Do you feel sometimes is the spirit of that still there, or does it change, or
like I said before, with another track, Splash of Blue, which was on the Lambert Cronk. I mean, they're both written about the same time. So and lyrically they tied in with, and thematically in a sense tied in with the very loose positive vibe sort of, because it's all about, if you stick together and you can work through this kind of thing, and it really fitted in, so I felt it was valid to put it on.
Absolutely. I mean, I must admit, I looked at the artwork. The artwork is absolutely wonderful. I mean,
I love it.
Is it a kind of a story behind the artwork, and how would you tie it in with the music? Or
the artwork was very much down to John W. Overwood's at Renaissance Records. He actually did it, and he said he used kind of images that came to mind from the 4 tracks I'd given him originally. He wrote it for the he created the artwork for the EP originally, the EP project, if you like. So he came up with that, and funnily enough, when he did the artwork for that, and then we decided we'd go for an LP, I loved it what it did, and I used the artwork gave me images to carry on and write the additional songs. It was a kind of
so
two-way thing.
The music inspired the artwork, and then the artwork inspired the music.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
In a way, or it gave me ideas lyrically. Let's put it that way. But the artwork is totally down to him. Really, he did it all.
Well, it's a striking cover. It's certainly a striking cover. I'll have to dig out the artwork and perhaps try and put it in the thumbnail if I can, or do something like that.
Okay.
Next question I had for you is one that I was going to ask you about Splash of Blue in the guitar, but you've already answered that one. Would you be uncomfortable with the Strawbs being categorized as a prog band?
Not really. I mean, people have. I mean, we never thought of it as that, I suppose, in a way, or a progressive band, I suppose. But it was really when we toured America that I first heard the phrase added to the band often. So I think there are elements of that. I mean, it's certainly always been a really experimental band.
Sure.
We wanting to try and push some boundaries in the recording methods we used and the things, and so I suppose in a symphonic sort of way, and of course the use of the mellotron, back in the day, and Moog synthesizers and that sort of thing in the early days.
I just love the sound of the mellotron, but it's everyone says it was a really tricky instrument to use. But are they still used these days? I don't think they are they?
Well, I think most of them would be based in a studio or someone's home or something, because they were fabulous, evocatively sounding instruments, but they're notoriously difficult to transport.
Of course.
So I mean, we used to have with Strawbs in the 70s. I know when we were touring America, an awful lot. But I think we had 2 or 3 on the road, and the road crew were constantly having to kind of Meccano-like, take bits from one to get another one going, and then get spares in, and so it was a tricky instrument to transport.
It lent itself so well to that whole 60s vibe, because it had this very ethereal, airy sound to it, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
But I spoke to Steve Hackett, and he said they were constantly, they got damp, had problems with them and all sorts of things. Just a complete nuisance. But I imagine the sound of the mellotron could just be sampled these days and replicated on more portable keyboards, I would have thought.
Well, yes, I think that's true. But although the purists would always say there's nothing like the real mellotron, and the same way with the Hammond organ. Can you can get very close, but nothing like standing in the wings with someone like Focus playing and standing behind Thijs van Leer's Leslie speaker as it's going. You really remember what Hammond organs are all about when you hear something like that close up.
Exactly, and the Hammond organ. I mean, what would Deep Purple be without that Hammond sound? I think, and where Strawberry Fields without the mellotron, it's just unthinkable, isn't it? Really, but So I mean, would you? I mean, it's hard to pigeon, and people like to pigeonhole bands. If the Strawbs certainly had progressive elements, I think, in their music.
That's right. Yeah,
a lot of leanings towards sort of folk as well. Would you say that was fair?
Oh, well, 100%, because I mean, it really came out of the folk, 60s folk generation before I joined Strawbs. They started off as a bluegrass band, I think, aspiring to be, then quickly turned in, but once they discovered the joy of songwriting, it quickly became a movement out of the 60s folk movement in this country, really. And, lyrically, of course, Dave is, a wonderful lyricist. So it's that whole poetic art sort of folk movement. Yes, it's sprung out of that, but it did go electric, obviously, at one point. But those roots are still with Dave, very much, and I think we've all been influenced by them one way or the other.
Sure. I mean, with the whole progressive thing, I mean, what was it like? Didn't you play on Rick Wakeman's The Six Wives of Henry VIII?
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like as an experience? What's Rick Wakeman like as an artist to sort of engage with?
Oh, well, terrific then. I mean, Rick and I were sort of very close friends before music really happened for either of us. When I met Rick, it was in a music shop in Ealing, and he was playing with the owner of the shops, who was a drummer, was playing with his little show band, and I met in the shop, went along to see, and I thought, always a bit handy. But at the time, I was signed to a company called Writers Workshop, and part of the Wriggles on a phone label. Denny Cordell, the famous old producer, was the boss of it. And as a kid, they signed me up because they liked the songs I was writing, and he was giving me bits of studio time. So they had this artist called Jimmy Thomas, who under their wing as well, who was from the Ike and Tina Turner show, basically a soul singer, wonderful voice. But they were going to do a single with him, and they needed a keyboard player. Well, I just met Rick. Met Rick, and I thought, well, Rick's more than capable of this, say the least. So I got him in on the session, and Tony Visconti was the producer of that session, who was a junior engineer producer, studying under Denny Cordell, if you like, and basically they all took one look at Rick, and then Rick started doing sessions. So he and I had already established quite a working relationship before that. Of course, he then went to Strawbs, and through Strawbs, and then on to Yes, and obviously we remained friends through all that. So when he came to do Six Wives, he called me in as one of the bass players on it. So he was a joy to work with, really. In those days, he'd come up with ideas, but he'd often just say, "This is what I've done. Go and do what you want, really." So some of those melodic bass lines, I just put on, out of the air at the time, sort of thing, and.
I mean, about the time you mentioned about Rick doing the session work, would that been about the same time he played on the Bowie record and?
Well, that all led on. I mean, from doing that first session on the Jimmy Thomas single, he his session career took off. I mean, and bless him, I got involved with some of his projects he got into, because he started doing film stuff for some big old famous film fixers at the time, like Stanley Myers, and that's where I met Dave Lambert properly, because Dave Lambert had met him because of the Strawbs connection when Rick was with the Strawbs, and we were doing kind of big film soundtracks together, all of us. So Rick, I mean, I do remember actually hearing that David Bowie, album, Rick playing it to me on a cassette round when it wasn't even cassette, reel to reel, I think, at his home. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And the mellotron sounds he had on there.
I've got a couple of questions from my subscribers. Sound City Productions asks, are you responsible for the arrangement on Midnight Sun?
On Midnight Sun, goodness. Well, Midnight Sun was the first writing contribution I had with Strawbs, and we were making the Hero and Heroine album, the first one I did with the band, and we'd spent quite a bit of time writing, rehearsing, and arranging ideas Dave had and various people had, and we had the bulk of the album together, and we were recording in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and all of a sudden they felt they were short of a song. We needed one other song, and I just played Dave the chords because I had Midnight Sun roughly together as a piece, you know, and as often happened with my writing partnerships with Dave when we did co-write, he just kind of took off on it straight away. Got his pen and paper out, and started scribbling lyrics, and we sort of put it down pretty much as it was, as I had it at the time. So I think the arrangement probably was a collective effort between me and Dave and Tom Allen, the producer and engineer. But I suppose the bulk of the structure of the song I had in place, you know. Music.
That kind of links into my last question, really. It's I can't let you go without asking you about Hero and Heroine. If somebody has asked, what was the atmosphere and vibe like while you were recording that album? Did you feel you were making something special? And were all the musical ideas already written when presented to the band prior to the recording sessions?
Yes, a lot of work went in before going into the studio and that, although obviously not complete, hence Midnight Sun and things like that were written in put together in the studio. But the atmosphere was really good. I mean, I had only just joined the Strawbs, so coming out as a young session player, you know, and being recommended coming into the band, I felt, well, I was the new boy as such, you know, because other new boys were John Hawkin and Rod Coombs. Well, Rod Coombs as a drummer was already very established with stuff he had done, and John Hawkin, of course, had a legendary kind of track record from the Nashville teams onwards. So I felt very much a new boy. But having said that, all the rehearsals, we went down to Devon and spent quite a bit of time writing and rehearsing stuff down there. And some of the stuff was put together pretty well before we got into the studio, and other stuff went along as it happened, really. I mean, I seem to remember Autumn was sort of written pretty much or finished off on the road, you know, in a rehearsal studio in New York. But there was tremendous collaborative effort around putting all those songs together and the arrangements for them.
Well, it's regarded as a very special album, I think, by Strawbs fans. I think the last time I saw you, the Electric Strawbs, you played the album in its entirety. I mean, such as
hard.
And were you aware, do you think, when you were making that album, that wow, this is something special, or was it just the next album?
Well, I can't say how the other guys are being kind of more, having been in the Strawbs longer, felt about it. For me, obviously, it was a special album because it was the first one I was doing with them. But I didn't realize it would have the longevity it has, in a sense, or be, you know, that admired by certain people, you know, still 40 years on or 50 years on, you know.
It's a lovely album. I've just got one last question for you, really. Is COVID aside, do you think there'll be any plans to perhaps do a tour of this album or something like that? You'll go out on the road with it?
Well, I think the album would have to sort of perform quite well, should we say, in terms of sales, or create a demand for it. You know, I'm realistic in the point, you know, I might be Chaz from the Strawbs and I might work with Rick Wakeman's, Steve Hackett, etc. But that I don't have a band as it stands. So yeah, I think it would take a bit of putting together, but it could be done.
Okay.
It could be done,
Well,
but no plans as such. If somebody creates a demand for it, or
well, the early signs seem to be that there is an interest, so it's looking positive.
well, I hope so. Yeah, that'd be
Keeping
great.
with the
I mean,
positive theme of the album, it's looking good.
well, yeah, I hope it's a new one on me, really, having a record deal myself and doing it. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens as it happens. But I'd happily take it out on the road if there was a demand there for it, if you know what I mean. But
Sure. Chaz, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this morning. I wish you the very best of luck with this new album.
Thank you.
And the best of luck if you ever do decide to go out on the road with it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to me this morning.
Well, it's a pleasure speaking to you.
Okay.